It all starts with the MC's mother completely covered in bruises, holding a knife and asking what she should do since his father was gone. However, our MC Aram didn't care about any of that and was completely focused on his computer, even though his father had passed away. Little Aram says that everything is fine, because even if he ends up completely alone, the game Last Eden will always be by his side. Inside the game, a beginner guide named Eve appears. Welcome Aram. The MC's character looked heavily leveled up, typical of a hardcore gamer. Smiling, Eve welcomes him to Last Eden once again, and asks if they should start playing. And that was the game that would always stay right beside our MC. Aram tells Eve that she is all he needs, completely ignoring the terrible mess in his room around him. Years later, the young man walks down the street with an extremely dark and exhausted expression on his face. Along the way, he comes across a poor fallen cat, covered in flies lying on the ground. Aram looks at the animal and whispers to himself that everything still feels exactly the same as in the past. The surrounding students start whispering in horror about the cat, talking about how Aram is the son of a criminal who went to prison. A girl walks past a classmate and complains with disgust about that scary situation. She keeps complaining about the young man's creepy gaze, commenting that even though she doesn't know him, he is way too weird. The young man's gaze remains cold and fixed, showing zero reaction to the mean comments. The gray-haired guy asks if she really doesn't know Aram, while the girl trembles, saying that whole situation is crazy. He then reveals that the young man's name is Han Aram, and that his mother is a terrible criminal. In the classroom, Aram's desk is completely vandalized, with insults and aggressive drawings. The young man just watches that bullying scene in silence, showing no surprise or anger whatsoever, even with an offensive note stuck to his back. He sits down and thinks that everything is fine, because he still has Last Eden. Returning home, the young man stares at his apartment door, in complete silence. He turns the doorknob slowly and opens the door to step into his personal sanctuary. At that moment, the story shifts to the virtual universe of the game Last Eden. Aram explains that this is an old online game created before he was born, where his parents originally met and got married. But at some point, his family's reality began to fall apart completely. Because of that, the game introduced to him by his mother ended up becoming the only safe haven for his mind. Time went on, and almost all the players abandoned the server. But Aram stayed strong right there. He feels that the virtual world he walks through now feels far more real than his actual life outside. Inside the game, Aram is the strongest warrior of all and feels like he can achieve anything he desires. Suddenly, he hears someone calling his name near a massive glowing structure. It's the guide, Eve, who warmly greets him and asks if he had a good day today. The mighty level 250, rank 1 warrior merely whispers his digital companion's name. Aram remembers that Eve was always by his side right from the start of his long, lonely journey. Since she was just a beginner guide, all the other players abandoned her quickly, but he decided to stay with her. The boy deeply valued the artificial intelligence's presence, as she was his only company whenever he was alone in the real world. Holding her hand, he hears the guide ask if something is wrong with him. Eve comforts him, saying he can talk to her and tell her anything at any time. She reassures him with a gentle smile that she will always be right there by his side to support him. However, a notice on the screen thanks everyone for their support and officially announces the end of the game service for September 2026. Aram freezes completely in front of the computer upon reading that terrible shutdown news. He panics as he realizes that the only thing he had left is also about to abandon him. The young man grieves deeply before the screen, remembering that everything he owns in life is saved inside there. That includes all the valuable items he accumulated and the massive amount of gold coins he earned. Everything he achieved with so much effort, like reaching max level in the top of the global rankings, is going to vanish. And worst of all is knowing he will also lose Eve's lovely presence forever. The young man's gaze fills with profound anguish as he makes a quiet decision. Determined to cherish his final moments, he clicks his mouse to interact with the game. One last time, the game's dialog box opens once more, with Eve asking if Aram had a good day today. On screen, the guide Eve asks if something is wrong, and says he can vent to her whenever he needs to. She tries to reassure him, saying she will always be right by his side. Aram fixes his melancholy gaze on the screen and wonders if she really would stay by his side forever. Suddenly, a notification pops up on the game screen, indicating that the server shut down. Process is already beginning. At that, the young man softly laments that she is abandoning him too, just like his parents did. The countdown for the final server shutdown starts ticking on screen, with only 3 seconds remaining. He recalls the past in the game, when he questioned why everyone was leaving him, revealing that he didn't want to be left alone. As those painful memories flood his mind, the server clock ticks down to just 2 seconds. In the memory, he was telling Eve that he still wanted to keep living that grand adventure, right? Alongside her, time almost entirely runs out, and the screen shows only 1 second left until the end of everything. Completely hopeless, Aram whispers to himself that, amidst all this pain, he would prefer something else. The young man stares at the screen with Eve's reflection in his eyes and deeply wishes that the real world was just a game. Right then, the computer emits an intense glow, and a mysterious message announces that the game isn't over yet. Aram is completely stunned to see that light shining brightly right in front of his eyes. Eve's friendly pixelated image appears, smiling warmly on the glowing screen. She invites him to start the game together, leaving the young man in complete shock. The next day, sunshine streams into the room through the window as the curtains gently sway. Aram wakes up, slumping over his computer keyboard, asking himself in confusion if he ended up falling asleep right there. Seeing the message that he was disconnected from a server, he begins to believe it was all just a dream. The day goes on normally, and the scene shifts to his school building. The young man quietly enters the classroom, carrying his usual heavy expression. But right at the entrance, the gray-haired bully confronts him, yelling his name provocatively, without giving him time to react. The attacker lands a violent kick on Aram and calls him a crazy jerk. The blow knocks Aram to the classroom floor hard as he groans in pain. The bully demands to know, shouting loudly, if Aram was the one who put that thing on top of his desk. Even while spitting red liquid on the floor and being called a freak, the young man asks in confusion what could possibly be on the desk. Upon lifting his head, Aram's eyes begin to glow intense blue as he notices something extremely bizarre. To his total surprise, sitting on top of the desk is the severed head of a monster labeled as a level 1 goblin. Aram is completely shocked to recognize that creature identical to a level 1 goblin from the game. He remains lying on the classroom floor, trying to process that bizarre sight while everyone surrounds him. The other students whisper among themselves, asking if he has lost his mind for good and failing to understand what he is talking about. That happens because, in everyone else's eyes, what rests on top of the desk is just the body of a fallen cat. The gray-haired bully glares at Aram with deep contempt and calls him the son of a criminal. He walks toward the young man and mockingly asks if, just like his mother, he also lost touch between games and reality. The attacker gets even closer and aggressively grabs Aram by his school uniform collar. He raises his fist to strike Aram and mockingly demands that he guess what his current level is. Aram keeps staring at his rival with glowing eyes without uttering a single word or showing any fear. The young man finally breaks the silence and coldly replies that the attacker is also just a level 1. Overcome with extreme rage, the bully curses the young man and prepares to throw a powerful punch at him. However, a mysterious female hand appears out of nowhere and effortlessly catches the attacker's fist in midair. The bully panics upon having his strike blocked and asks, terrified, if Aram can see that too. The scene reveals a digitized, pixelated golden arm gripping the attacker's wrist with incredible force. The attacker is left speechlessly confused, groaning under the overwhelming pressure of that invisible touch. Suddenly, the mysterious arm begins to surge with dark, distorted energy that lashes out at the attacker's limb. The bully lets out a desperate scream of agony as he feels his arm violently struck by the dark force. He drops to his knees on the classroom floor, crying in deep pain as dark fluid drips onto the ground. The students panic and scream, commenting in terror that something bizarre happened to his arm right in front of the TV. At that moment, the classroom television screen displays pink static with the dark silhouette of a girl. The mysterious girl's voice echoes out, saying she waited for a long time and that the time has finally come to fulfill the promise. Right after that, a massive, gleaming golden creature begins to forcefully emerge from inside the monitor screen. The beautiful and radiant guide, Eve, finishes emerging completely from a monitor, glowing with an angelic golden hue. Aram looks at her, covered in sweat and amazed, unable to believe what he is seeing right before his eyes. Eve smiles sweetly and remarks that this is finally the heir of the real world. The surrounding students start whispering in despair, asking themselves what that thing is or if they're filming some movie. At that point, a status bar displaying the name and level 1 mysteriously appears floating above one student's head. The entire room falls into total panic upon realizing that level 1 numbers have appeared above everyone's head. Ignoring the chaos, Eve focuses her gaze on Aram and reveals she was eagerly waiting to finally meet him. She unfurls her beautiful wings and confesses that just the thought of being with him makes her heart beat so much faster. An old memory from the game shows the two of them, when they were younger, sharing simple moments together in the forest. To Eve, the game was a literal living nightmare, just as reality was a painful living nightmare for young Aram. In truth, both were just traumatized beings desperately trying to escape their own personal hell. Eve proposes that they merge the game with reality and eliminate any obstacle or person that stands in their way. She assumes a commanding stance and invites him to rule this world, opening a dialogue box to accept the game with her. The guide promises it won't be difficult and asks if he remembers when he already went through a near-end experience in the past. At that moment, Aram relives the terrifying memory of when he was a child holding a bloody knife before his fallen father. Back in the present, the young man whispers Eve's name in an extremely dark, mysterious tone of voice. His eyes glow intense red as he asks if she already knew about his entire dark past. Nearby, the gray-haired bully continues screaming in pain. On the floor, under the indifferent glare of the beautiful golden winged guide, the attacker cries and desperately begs for an ambulance, saying he is feeling unbearable pain in his arm. Suddenly, a giant sword appears out of nowhere and brutally pierces through the bully's back, making him groan in agony. Aram wields the massive golden sword and realizes, shocked, that it is the exact same weapon he used inside the game. Without any mercy, the young man strikes down the fallen bully, splattering dark fluid across the classroom. Aram remains standing beside the defeated attacker's body, holding his gigantic stained sword. He looks back coldly with his eyes glowing blue, completely focused on his next step. Eve approaches him with a calm expression and calls the young man's name. The guide gives an excited smile and celebrates that from now on, they can finally do everything together. However, a violent red slash strikes Eve by surprise, brutally cutting off her speech. Aram lands a devastating blow that destroys the system selection box right in front of the guide. The young man gives a dark smile upon realizing he managed to land a perfect critical hit against the artificial intelligence. From the overwhelming impact of the attack, the holographic system screen shatters completely into dozens of pieces. Eve is knocked violently to the classroom floor while spilling a large amount of dark fluid. Aram points his sword at her with a colossal demonic aura at his back and asks if he really needs her help. He wears an insane smile on his face with his max level and rank 1 status floating above, declaring that he is already the strongest of all. Eve's body begins to slowly dissolve into numerous petals of light following Aram's violent strike. As her face fragments, Eve asks mournfully why he decided to break their promise like this. With a melancholic look, the guide questions why Aram chose to stay by her side for all that time. Aram steps firmly on the stained classroom floor and coldly remarks that NPCs don't seem to drop that easily. Looking at his face reflected on the giant, dirty golden blade, he repeats Eve's own question about why he stayed with her. Aram points his giant sword at the fallen Eve and dryly reveals that she was just a substitute. To him, he confesses it didn't have to be her, but since everyone else abandoned him in the past, Eve just happened to be the only one left. With an enigmatic smirk, the young man prepares to continue his dark explanation. Meanwhile, heavy rain pours down on an isolated women's prison in the middle of the night. Inside, several guards lie defeated on the floor, and Aram reflects that if the world turned into the game Last Eden, he has other plans. Aram decides he prefers to ally himself with an entity far stronger than the guide. While his old rank 1 status appears in the air, he begins walking slowly in his white boots, carrying his massive golden sword. The young man grips his giant weapon firmly, ready for any new clash that might arise in the room. With an insane smile and eyes glowing blue, Aram tells Eve not to perish from just one hit from him. He charges toward her at high speed, stating that a quick end would make the game way too easy. Eve observes his approach seriously and laments that he acted this way in the end. The guide makes a calm gesture and raises her hand to snap her fingers right in front of the young man. She murmurs disappointedly that Aram turned out to be just like every other human. As she snaps her fingers, a massive explosion of bright blue light occurs in the middle of the classroom. Eve glows intensely at the center, while gigantic portals begin opening around her. Aram senses something shattering right in front of him and attempts to dodge the surprise attack. He feels a small cut on his cheek and realizes it has been a long time since he last took damage. The young man notices a bizarre creature emerging and realizes it's the exact same monster he used to hunt as a beginner. Upon seeing the terrifying creature materialize, the other students fall into complete panic, asking if that is real. A slimy level 5 creature named Moisty appears, growling fiercely with sharp claws. In the blink of an eye, one of the students is violently grabbed by the monster and lets out a desperate scream of pain. The creature ruthlessly crushes the student while the others scream in horror, failing to comprehend what is happening. The classroom ceiling begins crumbling with a loud crash, revealing a giant eye, and the teens scream for everyone to run. Amidst the chaos, students flee frantically, trampling over injured classmates who beg for help on the floor. Monsters invade the entire school through the windows, attacking and dragging away crying students, shouting for help. Suddenly, a beam of bright blue light slices through the air, with extreme precision in the middle of the room. Aram wears a confident smile and whispers that all it takes is a single strike to finish them off. He strikes down a giant monster with immense ease, triggering an instant defeat effect with just one hit. The creature is split in half by the golden sword's devastating attack and lets out its final whimper of pain. Aram continues moving swiftly through the room, eliminating several monsters in sequence using his single strike technique. A goblin attempting to attack is instantly sliced apart by the young man's lightning-fast swing. With extreme agility, Aram executes another round of clean slashes against the invaders. Eve simply watches that entire display of power in complete silence. Aram rests his sword on his shoulder and disappointedly remarks that this is getting way too boring, asking if Eve only has this much to show. Standing before a pile of fallen monsters, the young man scoffs at the artificial intelligence for thinking such weak creatures could even scratch him. Eve calmly steps toward Aram and lightly touches his forehead with her finger, asking if he truly thinks that way. She gives a slight, mysterious smile and asserts that a game without any challenge wouldn't be fun at all. At that exact moment, Aram's vision begins to fail and distort completely under a bright, intense glare. Opening his eyes, the young man finds himself transported to a flowery landscape in front of a giant, closed stone door. Aram looks around in confusion at the sudden change of scenery and asks himself what kind of weird place this is. He observes the detailed carvings on the massive structure and realizes that this is the legendary entrance to Last Eden. Suddenly, the giant stone gate begins to slowly open, while a dark, eerie mist spills out from within. Aram readies his giant sword in hand as purple smoke starts covering the entire flowery lawn. Several extremely powerful boss monsters of very high levels begin emerging from the darkness of the gate. Aram faces that colossal horde of scary creatures, preparing for the toughest battle of his life. The small pixel version of Eve appears on the monitor screen and asks Aram what he thinks of all this. She says she prepared this challenge specially for him, and the young man decides it's worth giving it a try. Right after, a rapid sequence of violent strikes and deep slashes begins unfolding across the battlefield. Aram swings his massive golden sword skillfully through the air, preparing to strike the monsters surrounding him. The young man flashes an excited smile upon realizing he can finally use his active skills, unleashing a low damage area of effect slash. Facing the giant gate and massive monsters, Aram remarks to himself that this can't be all the game has to offer. As he walks over the white flowers, he complains that this challenge feels no different from what he has faced before. The pixel guide resurfaces on screen, saying that's obvious, since this is only round one of the fight. A massive creature begins descending from the sky with force, leaving Aram thoughtful upon hearing about round one. Next, the system announces the start of round two, as dark red chains materialize in midair. A colossal level 100 horse, hoof wrapped in chains, comes crashing down on the flowery ground with a terrifying whinny. The gigantic beast reveals itself entirely as it roars furiously amidst the dark mist. Aram unleashes an extremely fast, precise strike, shattering the chains with a burst of blue energy. The massive creature lets out a groan of agonizing pain upon being hit by the young man's overwhelming strike. Aram executes a devastating vertical swing with his golden sword to finish off the monster once and for all. The system confirms that round two has been successfully cleared as pieces of the monster fall to the ground. Wiping his face with his glove, Aram wonders why these creatures are appearing one at a time. He looks at the dozens of floating screens around him and, finding the whole thing tedious, dares all the monsters to come at once. That instant, the holographic screens begin cracking and shattering into pieces violently. A massive horde of terrible monsters starts leaping out from inside the broken monitors. Aram finds himself completely surrounded by hundreds of bizarre creatures, rushing in from every direction simultaneously. He quickly dodges a claw swipe and realizes that the real fight is about to start right here. Wielding his sword with a confident smile, the young man taunts the game, asking if that is really all they've got. Aram begins spinning his weapon at extreme speed, creating a storm of slashes around himself. In short order, completion messages for rounds 3, 4, and 5 pop up on screen as he slaughters the enemies. He leaps into the middle of the horde and releases an energy burst that shatters dozens of monsters in an instant. Aram lands smoothly on the ground and scoffs at the challenge level, saying he expected much more from those monsters. With his eyes glowing blue, he asks the remaining creatures if they really think they can stop him with so little. The young man continues the slaughter, pressing forward against the horde and slicing through everything that moves with ease. Aram looks at his sword glowing with a bluish aura and lets out a mocking laugh upon noticing something different. Realizing there were still enemies hiding beneath the soil, he drives his giant sword forcefully into the ground. The blade pierces through the earth and brutally skewers a gigantic creature crawling right below him. With his face splattered, Aram smiles sadistically and comments that he finally remembered the feeling of taking a hit in combat. He relives a painful childhood memory of being brutally beaten by his father, reflecting that the man must have lived for that adrenaline rush. The memory shows the dark moment when his mother attacked his father to protect him from that endless violence. Back to reality, Aram starts laughing out loud insanely, genuinely enjoying all that mayhem. On the monitor, little Eve congratulates the young man on clearing stage 17, commenting that he acted exactly as expected. Shortly after, upon clearing stage 31, she acknowledges that the young man has become too strong even for the game. Several system screens begin glitching and flashing rapidly, with stage clearance notifications in quick succession. The system enters total overdrive and displays Aram's max-level silhouette, while announcing the arrival of the final stage. Aram walks slowly in his knight armor, stepping over the meadow of white flowers. He looks at the pile of fallen bodies and scoffs, saying the monsters were too weak because they were summoned by a beginner guide. Eve's voice echoes from the floating monitor, warning that this is the last chance she will give him. A sweet memory of the past shows the golden, winged guide holding Aram's hand, asking them to go back to how they used to be. A choice box pops up on the game screen, asking if Aram wishes to join her in the virtual world of Last Eden. Without hesitating for a single second, the young man delivers a violent strike that shatters the entire holographic screen to pieces. With her image glitching and full of static, Eve coldly states that he just threw away his very last opportunity. Aram reacts with an ironic smile and scoffs at the guide's words, telling her to stop blabbering so loudly. However, the young man suddenly widens his eyes upon noticing something extremely bizarre happening right before him. Aram looks up startled and asks what is happening to the sky as Eve appears floating imposingly in front of the planet. Eve coldly warns that everything happening now is the direct consequence of his choices. Aram opens his blue eyes wide, completely confused about what she means by that. The guide reveals she intended to create a world just for the two of them, but reality and the game are now merging together. She says she changed her mind the exact moment she was betrayed by him, while the sky begins suffering a system glitch. To punish him, Eve decides she will blend other games into this world so that monsters of all kinds begin appearing. In the streets, people look up, terrified at the sky, unable to understand where those strange characters are coming from out of nowhere. A young man panics upon realizing his clothes are suddenly transforming into the outfit of a game character. Other pedestrians also notice in shock that their clothes turned into familiar avatars from games they used to play. The local news urgently out announces that mysterious entities are popping up across the country following the school incident. The news anchor reports in shock that citizens in various areas are having their appearances transformed into game characters. Aram reflects on the catastrophic consequences that will follow if other games also start merging with the real world. Then Zhang Hyun appears, the #1 player of another game, showing that there will be many other high rankers out there. The young man grips the hilt of his golden sword and repeats thoughtfully about the existence of other top rankers in this new world. He charges at Eve with determination, asserting that it doesn't matter because he will simply finish all of them off. Now, with dark wings and a shadowy look, the guide doubts with a sarcastic smirk that he can actually pull that off. Aram's hands and sword begin glitching and disintegrating into virtual data, while Eve questions if he can even exist. The game system starts deleting all of the young man's data, resetting his stats directly down to level 1. Eve points her finger at him mercilessly, declaring that no paradise remains for him in this world. Aram looks desperately at his glowing hands, realizing in total shock that he has gone back to being a weak level 1. With eyes glowing red with rage, the guide orders him to fight to the end in the true nightmare he chose to walk into. Absolute chaos erupts across the city with massive explosions everywhere as the new nightmare world begins. Aram falls into despair upon noticing that his legendary armor and mighty golden sword have completely vanished from his body. He looks at his empty hands in disbelief that all his effort, levels, and high-end items disappeared in the blink of an eye. Eve stares at him coldly and explains she took this drastic action simply because he decided to break their contract. The young man enters total shock upon hearing her disdainfully reveal that she just reset his character back to the beginning. The guide wears a satisfied smile, seeing the despair on the face of the youth, who previously thought he was the strongest of all. She challenges him to try starting all over again from absolute zero, mocking his new, weak, useless level 1 character. Eve lets out a mocking laugh, seeing him disarmed and helpless before her. To the guide's surprise, Aram covers his face with his hands and begins laughing hysterically in the middle of the stained room. With an insane look, the young man mockingly asks what she wants him to do now that he lost all his powers. He walks calmly and rests his foot over a tiny mushroom-shaped monster on the classroom floor. Without any mercy, the youth crushes the helpless creature with a heavy stomp, making the creature's fluid splatter. A level 2 notification appears over Aram's head, and he smiles, saying this is exactly the kind of world he wanted. Eve observes the young man's insane reaction and looks visibly surprised by his resolve to keep playing. Right after, The youth dashes across the room and swiftly defeats another monster, immediately rising to level 3. Aram laughs at the situation, having the time of his life with how easy it is to level up by beating simple creatures. The guide asks if he really thought the challenge would be just that, and prepares to summon something far worse. A massive strike obliterates the floor right where the young man stood, forcing him to dodge quickly to avoid being crushed. Aram is caught off guard by the speed of the attack, and tries to regain his balance amid the rising dust. He takes the full force of the impact and is slammed hard against the classroom floor. The youth spits red liquid and pushes himself up from the ground, trying to figure out what kind of powerful creature just blindsided him. Eve slowly steps closer with a calm expression and proposes they test his actual current strength. She summons a colossal level 45 monster and mocks Aram, telling him how pathetic he is without her help. The young man stares at the giant beast with an extremely focused, cold gaze. The monster's giant paw, packed with sharp claws, comes crashing down toward him to crush him without mercy. Aram slides across the floor, dodging the attack, and flashes an excited smile, loving the real danger. He stands up confidently and softly comments that he knew perfectly well she would resort to that kind of trick. The young man looks toward the corner of the room and spots a mop soaking inside a bucket of water. Aram firmly grabs the mop handle and decides that simple tool will be his new combat weapon. He takes a battle stance, wielding the mop, and challenges the guide to restart the game against him right now. Aram holds the wooden handle of the damp mop tightly, bracing for improvised combat. With a quick motion, the young man strikes the creature right in the middle of its face, using the tip of the handle. The monster lets out a screech of pain upon taking a direct hit from Aram's precise blow. Aram notices his current damage output is very low, but manages to dodge easily since he already knows all the beast's attack patterns. He wears a defiant smile with his blue eyes glowing brightly in the middle of the fight. Eve looks at him with disdain and mocks the situation, commenting that the game is way too easy for him once again. Suddenly, the monster reacts aggressively, and the impact snaps Aram's improvised weapon, catching him off guard. The wooden handle shatters into dozens of pieces from the force of the counterattack. Aram is pushed back by the wind pressure as he tries to maintain his battle stance, breaking out in a cold sweat. The young man gives a nervous smile upon realizing the creature moved much faster than he anticipated. The monster lunges fiercely at the youth, while Eve mockingly asks if that is the limit of his character. Aram looks confused at the remaining piece of wooden handle, which keeps cracking in his hands. Without giving him time to react, the beast's giant paw grabs him and begins crushing him forcefully, being squeezed by the monster. Aram screams in pain as he takes consecutive small hits to his health points. Even immobilized, the young man displays a sadistic smile and taunts the enemy, saying creatures of that level are nothing to him. Annoyed by his arrogance, Eve asks how he dares to act like that while the monster squeezes him tighter. Aram continues, being crushed by multiple claws at once, and insanely dares the beast to keep attacking. Eve floats closer and asks if he finally understands his true situation right now. Sitting comfortably on the monster's claw, the guide throws in his face that he is nothing without her help. Aram stares at her with a dark look and questions if he really wouldn't be capable of doing anything without her support. Eve just gives a slight smirk, totally convinced he will end up begging for her help shortly. The guide decides to turn her back and walk away, telling Aram to try managing on his own this time. She glances back with a confident smile, asserting that in the end, he will definitely come looking for her again. With those words, Eve's body dissolves into virtual data, and she completely vanishes from the classroom. Aram remains pinned to the floor, surrounded by the giant beast's claws growling furiously above him. Lying under the claws, the young man smiles in relief at her departure and remarks that the real fun is just getting started. One of the creatures opens its giant maw filled with sharp fangs, preparing to devour him once and for all. Aram's blue eye shines with an exotic pattern as he reflects that Eve really amuses him, just like in the old days. A memory of the past shows a crying girl holding a knife in the middle of a dark setting. Back to the present, a mysterious girl with gray hair and headphones appears looking at Aram and asks if he is all right. Lying on the girl observes the dangerous situation and calmly remarks that she is glad she didn't show up too late. She extends her arm, pointing her finger at the noisy creatures, calling them mere annoying pests. A bright yellow energy begins swirling around her hand as she comments that this difficulty level must be just right. The young girl releases an overwhelming wave of musical energy that directly hits the claws holding the young man. With a massive crash, the force of the attack crushes the monster's limbs and forces it to release Aram immediately. Aram drops freely to the ground and starts coughing heavily to catch his breath after the impact. Still very weak, he stares at the girl with a confused look and wonders who on earth she is. The young girl raises her hand under columns of colorful light reminiscent of a rhythm game, triggering an ability called Music. A system screen appears confirming the start of the battle song titled Dance of Flowers. Massive blocks of luminous energy rain down from the ceiling like musical notes, viciously crushing the monsters. The crushing impact of the light notes pulverizes the creature's claws to the sound of the battle melody. Aram watches the scene from the ground and wonders if that girl is the top ranker Eve was talking about earlier. He looks at her glowing headphones and realizes she truly belongs to another game that merged into reality. The young girl's fingers move at extreme speed through the air, and the combo counter rapidly hits the 175 mark. The onslaught continues relentlessly, passing 300 hits and completely devastating the giant monster. The note combo surges to nearly 600 consecutive hits right before Aram's completely shocked eyes. The system glows brightly and announces the perfect completion of the track with a full gold note combo. The girl strikes her victorious battle pose, leaving the exhausted and impressed youth lying on the ground right behind her. The giant claws of the enemy monsters fall completely shattered, transformed into broken rocks scattered on the floor. A delicate hand reaches down toward Aram, offering help to lift him up from the ground. Jang Hyuna stands before him and says with a sigh of relief that she finally managed to find him. The girl excitedly reveals she had been searching for Aram for a long time, while her status as rank one of the game's star beat glows above her. Aram stares at her in an extremely cold manner and asks who she thinks she is to Button like that, threatening her life. Surprised by his harshness, Hyuna turns red and awkwardly scratches her head, explaining she just wanted to help out. The youth, still at level 3, sighs in boredom and laments that the fight was just starting to get fun. Suddenly, Aram quickly crouches down and firmly picks up a broken object from the ground. Holding the sharp fragment with his eyes glowing blue, he disappointedly murmurs that all of this is way too boring. In a swift, unexpected move, Aram lands a fatal strike on the neck of a nearby threat. The enemy's body collapses lifelessly onto the ground right in front of Hyuna, kicking up a cloud of dust. The girl's eyes widen in total shock, paralyzed before the young man's speed and coldness. Right after, Aram passes out and falls limp to the ground, leaving Hyuna panicked, unable to understand what just happened. She holds his face in panic, begging for this not to be happening for Real. With Aram completely pale and showing no signs of life, Hyuna shakes him frantically, begging him to wake up. Sweating nervously, the girl deeply grieves and says he can't end like this in such a tragic way. Suddenly, the young man's body begins disintegrating into virtual data while Hyuna screams in denial. The entire setting begins glitching and shattering with a huge blast of static that makes the girl scream in pain. In another part of the school, students run terrified through the hallways trying to escape an impending massacre. Hyuna cautiously peeks through the crack of a door to try and figure out what is happening in the hallway. She sees a crowd of people running frantically while being hunted down by relentless monsters. A strong game warrior is brutally cut in half by a devastating attack from an unseen enemy. Out of the shadows emerges the terrifying knight in black armor with glowing red slits in his closed helmet. Another surviving student is relentlessly sliced apart by the Dark Knight's sword. A high-level catgirl character falls injured and bleeding heavily after being struck by the Black Warrior. Her large fur paw glove falls limp onto the dust and rubble-covered floor. Huna approaches the injured girl and asks if she isn't one of her classmates. Huna reveals her rank 1 status, and the injured girl looks surprised to discover the girl's identity. Identified as Kong Ji-yeon at level 231. She begged for help claiming they are school friends. Huna stares at her with an extremely cold look and repeats the word friends with pure contempt. Ji-yeon lets out a desperate, insane laugh, trying to convince the top ranker that they actually share a connection. But before she can finish speaking, a red beam of energy brutally slices Ji-yeon in half. The Dark Knight collects a massive amount of experience points after the cruel takedown of the girl. Huna watches the scene horrified as her classmate's blood splatters directly onto her cheeks. The warrior celebrates the easy experience points as he hits level 249. A glowing aura surrounds the Dark Knight the moment he finally reaches the game's max level. The system announces with a golden crown that the mysterious player reached level 250. In the top of the leaderboard, the warrior removes his steel gauntlet and comments with satisfaction that it was an excellent idea to create an alt character. Huna observes everything in total shock, unable to utter a single word before what she says. Aram emerges from behind the helmet with a blood-stained smile, inviting her to start last. Eden's real main game. On the ground, a red apple sliced in half lies, broken among the battle debris. In his childhood memories, Aram's mother appears fallen on the floor, crying and struggling to whisper her son's name. Little Aram stares at his mother with his blue eyes glowing in the dim light of the messy room. Holding a sharp knife, the boy coldly asks his mother if he should eliminate his father to help her out. On the computer screen, the game Last Eden displays the message that in virtual worlds it is very simple to defeat bad monsters. The boy types in his login details while thinking it would also be extremely easy to end his father's life in reality. The mother falls into despair upon hearing her son's dark thoughts and immediately denies that terrible idea. Crying hysterically, she tries to convince little Aram that his father isn't a real monster. She justifies that her husband is just going through a very tough time and reminds him that he didn't always act in that violent way. Even bruised and bleeding from her face, the woman flashes a weak smile to calm her son's heart. She tenderly strokes little Aram's black hair, trying to bring a bit of comfort to that dark childhood. In that old memory, Aram's mother hugs him tightly and promises she will do anything to protect him from any danger. Back to the present, Huna cries and hugs the young man in his massive black knight armor, relieved to see him intact. The girl rests her face against his chest and confesses through tears that she really thought he was gone. Aram stares at her with an extremely cold look and says testily that she's been testing his patience for a long time. Without any hesitation, the young man shoves her away roughly, making her let out a groan of pain from the impact. He demands to know who she thinks she is to keep chasing him and questions what she actually knows about his life. Huna cries and confesses she always watched him from afar because she felt the young man was very similar to her past self. With a sweet smile amidst her tears, the girl reveals her only wish was to be able to help him somehow. She shouts that she wanted to protect him from all the hypocritical people who always looked down on him with utter contempt. Upon hearing her words, Aram breaks into a mocking smile and prepares to act with utter cruelty. Raising his giant bloodstained sword, he amusedly concludes that he finally figured out who was behind that. Huna swallows hard and takes a step back, sensing the impending danger as she faces the armored warrior's insane gaze. Aram smiles with his blue eyes glowing in the darkness and confesses he is very curious to test the girl's strength. He provocatively asks how long a max-rank player can last in real combat against him. Meanwhile, the Hanul school structure begins trembling and cracking from the immense spiritual pressure building in the air. A violent blast shatters the classroom windows and walls, hurling concrete debris in all directions. Huna flees running through the ruined hallways while desperately begging Aram to stop that senseless attack. The young man rushes forward at high speed, unleashing fatal slashes while she barely dodges and begs him to listen to her. She dodges another devastating swing that destroys the adjacent wall and projects her, voice asking him to stop attacking. Knocked off balance by the force of the impacts, Huna slips and falls onto the stone floor of the hallway, letting out a groan of pain. Aram seizes the opportunity and swings a devastating vertical slash that opens a deep fissure right in front of the girl. The impact shatters the floor and makes Huna scream in panic, realizing the young man isn't joking and genuinely wants to eliminate her. Aram observes her coldly during the assault and notes that despite appearing clumsy, she manages to move with great agility. He notices with surprise that the girl is managing to predict and dodge all his strikes with exact timing on every movement. Focused on ending that annoying fight once and for all, the young man fixes his vision on her with his eyes glowing blue. Aram lands another violent attack while the girl dodges again, complaining that he is extremely persistent and annoying. He thrusts his giant sword directly toward her face with absurd speed to try and skewer her. The blade grazes past Huna, who panics upon realizing the strike almost destroyed her combat headphones. Aram begins building up powerful blue magical energy in his gauntlets, and testily questions why she refuses to fight back. He complains that all the girl has done since the start of the clash is run, and dodges attacks like a coward. Aram hovers in the air, surrounded by magic circles, and activates the Silver Rain skill, summoning dozens of light swords around him. With a dark glare, the young man orders her to stop running and start fighting him for real once and for all. Hundreds of energy swords rain down from the ceiling like a lethal shower, destroying the whole scene as Huna covers her head with her hands. Cornered on the ground, the girl cries and tries to explain to Aram that Huna screams that she doesn't want to hurt him and raises her finger to activate an emergency skill to protect herself from the light swords. She projects a giant golden shield made of musical notes that perfectly blocks the shower of blades falling over her. Aram watches the magical barrier in total surprise, wondering what kind of bizarre skill she is using. The young man analyzes the shield and questions if her music technique is strictly defensive with zero attack capabilities. Huna grimaces with effort, trying to keep the shield up under the overwhelming pressure of Aram's light swords. She starts hitting the system notes at high speed, achieving a high combo to endure that ridiculous difficulty. Aram touches down on the ground and slowly walks toward her, complaining that her purely defensive strategy is way too boring. He points his golden sword at her neck and coldly warns that combat without counterattacks is no fun at all. Suddenly, Huna's eyes widen and she reacts at lightning speed upon sensing the warrior's dangerous approach. A deafening roar echoes through the school the moment both warriors' blades finally collide with massive force. Aram's eyes widen in total shock upon having his attack blocked by a new energy sword that materialized in her hands. Huna assumes the status of rank 1 from the game Rhythm Savers and draws her glowing sword, smiling and warning that she knows how to fight too. Aram cracks a wide smile of pure insanity upon realizing the girl possesses max rank characters across multiple games, with wide eyes and an expression of pure madness. The young man excitedly celebrates that the combat finally became what it should be. The two legendary warriors clash their swords with full force in the middle of the hallway, creating a devastating shockwave. The collision of their powers generates a massive flash of light that destroys part of Hanulskal. Under the heavy rain falling over the city, a massive shockwave generated by the colossal impact frightens nearby civilians, who start running in panic. Hearing the deafening sound, citizens flee screaming, asking themselves in desperation if that was a bomb. Reddish lightning and thunder begin slicing through the sky as tension rises alarmingly across the city. In midair, Aram and Huna exchange extremely violent blows with their light swords, creating bright sparks. Eve watches the fight from a distance and stands in complete shock, unable to believe what she is seeing. The guide realizes the young man possessed another hidden alt character, and Aram smiles sadistically. In midair, Eve tries to maintain her composure and reaches her hand out toward him, determined to reset Aram's new character once more. However, The game system flashes a red warning, categorically stating that that character cannot be deleted. The guide becomes totally confused, failing to understand why her divine power is no longer working against him. A mysterious man appears nearby, watching the situation, amusedly commenting on how Aram is such an interesting character. He steps up to Eve with a cynical smile and explains that that character simply wasn't created on her server. Eve stares at him with an extremely serious look and directly demands to know who on earth he is. The mysterious man gives a sadistic smile and ironically repeats the question about his own identity. Suddenly, demon wings tear through his back as he reveals himself to be a game NPC summoned right there thanks to her. He complains about the body he possessed, calling the gambling addict suffocating, disgusting, and far from fresh. Eve observes him with suspicion and tension, alert to every move of that new creature before her. The man begins bizarrely tearing at his own face to reveal his true, refined, original appearance. A terrible black goo drips from the sky as Eve watches terrified at the presence of that dark entity. Wearing expensive shoes, the man takes slow steps over the wet ground and asks if he should call her nemesis. He reveals his status as dealer of last eaten and grins with satisfaction at finally managing to escape into reality. The two stare at each other amidst the school ruins, with their massive black and red wings spread in the air. The dealer approaches with an ironic smile and mocks Eve, pointing out that she seems to have lost absolutely everything. The guide glares at him in silent hatred, clearly bothered by that creature's bold provocation. He displays a poker chip with her image drawn on it and compares her to a failed gambler who lost everything to luck. Annoyed, Eve tells the dealer to shut his mouth and loudly asks what he really thinks he knows about her. He asks for calm with a cynical smile and begins shuffling his playing cards, asserting he only wants to help her out. The man promises to turn Eve into a truly powerful top ranker, since she currently controls no strong warriors. He displays his illustrated cards and explains that his warriors always change, comparing it all to the thrill of a gamble. The dealer displays the hangman card with a blue magical glow and confesses his desire to create his own top-rank warrior. He proposes a friendly deal to Eve, claiming he wouldn't want to be taken out by her powerful warrior right after being reborn, showing cards of other professions. He says it would be tough to control all the top rankers, but luring just one is a piece of cake. The dealer points out that people who usually flee reality and take refuge in virtual worlds are the easiest prey. He shows the image of a hospitalized patient and guarantees that kind of person can be easily manipulated with the right card, displaying cards of soldiers and wheelchair users. He states he will place his first major bet on Eve for having enabled his birth. Eve listens closely to the dealer's words, seriously considering that demon's wicked proposal. He offers a magical card with no penalties and asks with a smile what she thinks of closing that betting deal. Far away, chaotic and noisy traffic takes over one of the city's main avenues under loud honking. Inside a car stuck in traffic, the driver impatiently complains that the lane isn't moving at all. The female passenger comments on the bizarre news she saw on television and questions if top rankers in games could be causing the traffic. The man laughs at the hypothesis and argues that today's artificial intelligence videos are so realistic they fool anyone. The woman agrees with a chuckle and jokes that if it were true, their game, Addicted Son, would have already taken over planet Earth. The driver mockingly smiles and asserts that if the world really were a game, he would simply crush everything in his path. However, his eyes widen upon hearing a loud, violent collision happen right in front of him on the avenue. Several cars start flying through the air in a brutal multi-car pileup in the middle of the asphalt road. The driver watches the scene in panic as a bizarre racing vehicle tears through traffic at high speed. The monster-faced red race car charges down the wrong side of the road, destroying everything in its path. A glowing game turbo icon hovers over the asphalt, triggering insane acceleration in the racing vehicle. The driver executes a violent drift and crushes civilian cars in a high-speed collision. Cars explode in flames across the road, and drivers perish crushed inside twisted wreckage, letting out cries of pain. The masked racer accelerates through the explosion smoke and celebrates that it had been a long time since he last drove freely like that. The red-masked driver speeds through the streets and reflects with satisfaction that this adrenaline rush is the true feeling of being alive. Back at the ruined school setting, Aram and Huna continue staring at each other, preparing for the next phase of combat. Huna insists the young man is getting everything wrong and guarantees her only real goal there is to try and help him. Aram gives an ironic smile and scoffs at her words, questioning if someone weak like her really thinks she can help him. The young man slowly steps toward the girl and warns with complete coldness that she's nothing more than a toy in his hands. But suddenly, a massive crash echoes through the area. As the red racing vehicle invades the battlefield at high speed, Aram opens his blue eyes wide, surprised at being interrupted by that unexpected presence amidst the ruins. The race car drifts violently around them, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and smoke. In the ruined courtyard, intrigued, the armored youth turns his head to face the bold driver, who just crash-landed. Into his fight, Hyena also stands frozen, staring at the strange, horned helmet driver, incomplete. Confusion and shock. The driver stops the vehicle before them and mockingly asks if he is the famous player, known as Han Aram. The race car's engine roars extremely loud, shooting sparks of fire from the rear exhaust. The driver smiles behind his mask and psychotically asks himself if he should go all out. This time, he stares intently at Aram and repeats the question in a tone of provocation to confirm if the young man is indeed last. Eden's legendary rancor. The engine roars violently once again, generating even more heat and smoke around the racing vehicle. The game system reveals that the driver is the level capped rank one of the game Death Racing, and he asks what their top speed is. The car begins circling at high speed around Aram and Huna, leaving deep burn marks on the ground. Showing no concern, Aram drags his massive golden sword along the stone floor and wonders what that thing is. With extreme ease, the armored youth raises his gigantic golden blade and readies himself for the clash. He points the tip of his sword toward the vehicle and questions if an insignificant piece of trash like that actually considers himself a top ranker. Huna panics upon hearing Aram call his opponent trash, wondering where all these people hunting him keep coming from. The masked driver responds mockingly, saying he doesn't care about Aram's doubts or curiosity. He warns the armored youth that he will be completely crushed and eliminated under the wheels of his vehicle. Regardless, Aram glares at him with disdain and comments that the opponent gives off an extremely foul, repulsive stench. The young man cracks a wide, sadistic smile and reflects that facing another max rank player might finally bring a little fun. The driver shifts gears and surges forward with an explosion of red energy directly toward Aram's armor. Huna watches the scene frantically, shouting in confusion at what is going on in that chaotic fight. The driver taunts Aram about his absurd speed, telling him to keep blabbering while he still can. The race car's wheel spins with extreme rapidity, creating violent friction against the courtyard's stone floor. Aram blocks the cars, advance with his sword, acknowledging that the opponent is indeed a speed specialist. He activates his glowing blue eyes and questions if the creature has any other skills besides just being fast. The driver maneuvers the car at high speed, striking from multiple directions and leaving trails of fire around the young man. He surprisingly confesses that this is the first time a mere human has managed to block his consecutive strikes. The driver accelerates even further and rams into Aram's defense, challenging him to hold out under the pressure. For long, Aram defends masterfully against a storm of rapid hits, keeping a firm posture with his golden sword. The young man analyzes his opponent's repetitive movements with disdain and lets out a sigh of disappointment. He fixes his cold gaze on his adversary, set on wrapping up that tedious battle with a single counterattack. Aram lifts his golden sword and boringly warns that the opponent offers zero excitement as an adversary. The system opens a screen revealing the activation of the counterattack skill, which deals massive damage in exchange for weapon durability. Aram executes the perfect counterattack and strikes the race car with a devastating blow. making the driver groan in pain. The young man scratches his neck in boredom and complains that he expected much more from a top ranker, calling him an annoying fly that only knows how to run. The driver lets out a sarcastic laugh and remarks that being called a fly was a bit of a harsh judgment on Aram's part. He flips a switch on the dashboard and warns that he actually just fired up his vehicle's engines for real. The race car's speedometer starts climbing rapidly until hitting maximum capacity in flames. A massive column of destructive red energy erupts from the car, charging at high speed toward the young man. Aram glances away, confused as he feels the pressure of the devastating strike graze right past him. The driver accelerates even further amidst the flaming trail, yelling that he still has one final turbo charge remaining. Activating the max turbo bar, he insanely roars that he will grind and tear Aram's entire body apart beneath his wheels. Seeing the extreme danger of the strike, Hyuna runs in front of Aram and activates her musical magic shield to absorb the impact. The girl struggles to hold the barrier up, confessing she didn't want to interfere, but admitting that attack looks way too dangerous. Aram realizes in surprise that Hyuna managed to predict and block an attack that was practically invisible, thinking she will be the most entertaining opponent of all. He categorically warns the girl that this battle is his own personal game and orders her not to butt in. Aram breaks into a terrifying smile and warns that as soon as he finishes crushing the car opponent, she will be next on his list. The driver guns his car down the wrong way and screams furiously, calling the two of them cowards for teaming up against him. Focused on the battle, Aram coldly analyzes the opponent's words and zeroes in on the fact that the attack was called a turbo. He notices that whenever the skill is used by the vehicle, the car's dashboard gauge rises significantly. The armored youth charges at high speed toward the enemy, aware that his priority now is preventing him from charging up his turbo. He leaps into the air and executes a violent vertical slash to try and hit the moving vehicle. The driver skillfully dodges and mocks the slowness of Aram's attack, asking if he really thought he could halt his drift. Keeping his eyes locked on the enemy, Aram grips his golden sword tightly amidst the battle dust. He unleashes a rapid barrage of strikes, but the vehicle dodges every attack, taking sharp turns across the track. The opponent maneuvers the car with agility, causing the young man to miss all his slashes, while sliding swiftly across the courtyard. Surprised by his persistence, the helmeted driver praises the black-armored youth's tenacity. Right after, he laughs loudly and scoffs, saying Aram only knows how to defend, and that all his attacks are slow as hell. Aram maintains his combat posture intact, while watching the enemy continue circling around him. The young man drives his gigantic sword forcefully into the ground, and claims to have the ideal strike to stop the driver's rampage. The stone ground begins cracking and crumbling violently from the immense spiritual power unleashed by the young man. He asserts he possesses the perfect technique to restrain the enemy's mobility, leaving the driver completely bewildered. Large fissures open up in the ground, and concrete slabs collapse, creating a literal abyss below the courtyard. The opponent tries to maintain control and testily asks what Aram thinks he is drawing on the track floor. Deep cracks spread in all directions, completely destroying the stability of the battlefield. Aram focuses his gaze on the track and watches the adversary's vehicle become completely trapped in the trench he created. The system reveals that the burial technique is an advanced level skill that buries enemies alive in the targeted area. Aram triggers burial, and the race car begins plummeting out of control into the massive dark pit that opened under its wheels. The vehicle plummets at high speed toward the deep darkness of the abyss, surrounded by falling rock debris. The young man warns his fallen opponent that after being buried alive deep underground, he will never be able to race again in his life. Total darkness consumes the bottom of the pit for a few moments, seemingly marking the end of the masked driver. But suddenly, two glowing blue headlights turn on at the bottom of the pit, and the car engine roars violently once more. A massive pillar of energy surges from the abyss and shoots up toward the heavens, defying every law of physics. The driver resurfaces, flying high in his vehicle, which now has red wings attached. Calling Aram an amateur beginner, the motorist cracks an insane smile behind his visor and warns that his racing isn't limited strictly to dirt tracks. A destructive beam of energy drops from the sky and slams into the ground with absurd force, générating une massive explosion. He mocks Aram, asking if he really considers himself the top player while being so weak and slow like that. Aram blocks the impact with his sword and shoots back the provocation, asking if someone who doesn't even run on their own legs has any right to speak about speed. With a sadistic, defiant smirk, the young man mocks the driver, reminding him that he relies entirely on a machine just to move. The driver opens his eyes wide behind his helmet visor, deeply shaken by the harsh truth spoken by the young man. A painful memory of the past reveals the driver fallen on the asphalt beside his completely destroyed race car. The man recalls his past agony and lets out a groan of pure pain and hatred as he relives that traumatic moment of his life. Overcome with rage, the driver triggers his turbo's max charge and insanely shouts that he is going to eliminate the armored youth. The vehicle becomes engulfed in intense, destructive flames, initiating a lethal charge to incinerate everything in its path. Huna watches that absurd display of power and becomes extremely terrified by the scale of the enemy attack. The girl walks anxiously through the destroyed setting and screams Aram's name upon, realizing the severity of the situation. The race car charges like a meteor of fire toward the young man, while Huna frantically attempts to intervene in the fight. The driver asks if the young man gave up on trying to stop his turbo mode now that the final attack was unleashed. Aram holds his sword, which begins cracking under the pressure, and calmly admits that trying to stop the opponent seemed useless. He smiles coldly amidst the destruction and taunts the driver that even at full power, he is still way too slow. The motorist loses control of his fury and roars with absolute hatred, calling the armored youth insolent and arrogant. He triggers max power mode, and the vehicle's dashboard hits the extreme red line limit amidst blazing flames. The collision creates a catastrophic explosion of fire and energy that cracks and demolishes nearby residential buildings. On distant streets, citizens look up terrified at the sky as massive chunks of buildings fly through the air. Huna backs away from the scene, holding her shoulders, frightened by the violence of the impact and the blood splattered across the floor. She breathes a sigh of relief for not getting stained and wonders thoughtfully what Aram is actually planning to do. The girl observes a destroyed building with a giant hole through the middle and wonders if the young man has some other hidden strategy. Far away, a major city bridge also appears severely damaged and smoking, following the impacts of the battles. In a courtyard, Aram appears kneeling amidst the rubble, holding only the handle of his golden sword, which was completely shattered. However, the young man looks up with a confident smile and comments with satisfaction that his weapon finally broke apart entirely. Seeing his opponent's situation, the driver maneuvers his race car back and mockingly asks if he has already given up on fighting. He points out that Aram has no weapons left in hand to keep facing him in that battle. The opponent adds that the armored youth likely burned through all his useful energy charging skills as well. The driver confidently accelerates, mocking that even without his own turbocharged, he can still crush trash like Aram. But in the blink of an eye, Aram appears at high speed and pierces the masked driver's chest with a clean, precise strike. The motorist stares at the blade in his chest in shock, unable to comprehend how the young man managed to attack him if his sword had broken. Aram displays a sadistic smile and ironically thanks the driver for breaking his giant golden sword moments earlier. The system reveals that the destruction of his sword allowed him to recover the original daggers used as fusion materials for the former weapon. The young man reclaims the dual blades of promise, a pair of lightweight daggers that sacrifice raw power in exchange for swift consecutive attacks. Brandishing his two new glowing daggers, Aram invites his injured adversary to begin the real showdown. The system confirms his class changed to Butcher, and he prepares to begin the battle. If you want the next part, like and comment below.